I want to thank you for joining us today and for your interest in the Play, Learn, Thrive funding call. We've received a lot of interest in this call, and it just highlights that this is such a crucial time to support innovative solutions for children and the key figures in their lives. And I think it's especially important to mention that we would not be able to offer this funding program without the generous support of the LEGO Foundation. And we're grateful to them for enabling our work and making this all possible. So with that, I'd like to invite our partner, Mary Winters, to introduce herself on behalf of the LEGO Foundation. Over to you, Mary.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Michelle. My name is Mary. I am a senior program specialist at the LEGO Foundation, and it's just an honor to be with you all today and participating in this webinar. I'm so excited for the milestone that we've all reached together and just really happy to be here today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mary. And now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Sama, who's going to lead us through this webinar.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Mary. Hello, everyone. My name is Sama, and I'm the Program Associate for Play, Learn, Thrive. Today, I'll be taking you through a presentation, just reviewing the request for proposals that we put out. So specifically, looking at the agenda for today, we will start with an introduction to Grand Challenges Canada, as well as Play, Learn, Thrive specifically. We will then do an overview of the request for proposals and talk specifically about how to apply to this RFP. And then finally, we will have time at the end for question and answer period. You are welcome to submit questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We request that you keep all questions relevant to all participants. If you have specific questions relating to your innovation, please email us at playlearnthrive@grandchallenges.ca. We will answer simple questions as much as possible in the Q&A box in writing, and then in the second half of this session, we will respond verbally to common or key questions that we feel are relevant to all participants. Grand Challenges Canada funds and supports innovators in low and middle income countries and Canada to seed and transition to scale their bold ideas with big impact. We envision a world where innovation helps every person thrive, and our mission is to build a healthier, more equitable world by supporting local, scalable, and sustainable innovation. GCC's areas of impact include global health innovation, humanitarian Grand Challenge, and Indigenous Innovation Initiative. To date, GCC has funded over 1,700 innovations in over 100 countries. These innovations are expected to save up to 1.78 million lives and improve up to 64 million lives by 2030. With funding from the LEGO Foundation, GCC hosts and manages the operations and implementation of Play, Learn, Thrive. Play, Learn, Thrive is a new portfolio at GCC, responding to gaps in the current early childhood development in emergencies and education in emergencies approaches. We aim to create strong support systems for children in complex crisis settings so they can play, learn, and thrive. We seek solutions that create more robust support systems for children from birth to 12 years of age in complex crisis settings, with a focus on those who have been left behind and those whose developmental and educational needs are not being met. I will now walk you through the request for proposals. There are two types of available funding opportunities under this RFP: Proof of Concept, or POC, and Transition to Scale, or TTS. Proof of Concept grants support early-stage innovations to test novel ideas and approaches to early childhood development and learning in polycrisis settings. By the end of the funding period, projects that receive seed funding are expected to demonstrate measurable evidence, or proof of concept, in a controlled or limited setting that the proposed solution is effective or more effective than traditional approaches, and that the innovation has the potential to progress towards scale. In this funding call, GCC is awarding 9 proof of concept grants of up to 250,000 Canadian dollars per project over a maximum of 24 months. Transition to Scale grants support tested innovations along their scaling journey. The goal of transition to scale funding is to support innovators to build out the evidence or attract additional capital and partnerships from local governments, multilateral institutions, and/or private investors. In this funding call, GCC is awarding 7 transition to scale grants between $300,000 and $1.5 million Canadian per project over a maximum of 24 months. We will continue to accept proposals for transition to scale projects on a rolling basis following the April 24th deadline, with subsequent deadlines in August and November. To be eligible for funding, applying organizations must be non-for-profit organizations that are legally incorporated, have an active presence in at least one priority country, be legally registered to do business in at least one of the 4 priority countries, and implement programming directly in at least one of the 4 priority countries. So to define the priority countries, as you can see on the screen, these are Jordan, Lebanon, Uganda, and Kenya. These 4 focal countries represent polycrisis settings spanning different types and stages of crisis. To define polycrisis, we turn to the World Economic Forum, who defines polycrisis settings as a cluster of related global risks with compounding effects such that the overall impact exceeds the sum of each part. Polycrisis spans settings that impede access to quality and enriching learning environments for children, including but not limited to exposure to conflict zones, situations of forced displacement, refugee camp and non-camp settings, marginalized host communities, remote and/or coastal communities, communities without access to water and sanitation, or communities that experience exposure to poverty, violence, disease, environmental hazards, and natural disasters. GCC is committed to funding, supporting, and advocating for more locally led solutions to drive change in the ECDIE and EIE spaces, as well as the humanitarian system more broadly. As such, preference will be given to applicants according to the following order of criteria listed on the screen, with 1 being the most preferred. 1, affected community owned. An organization whose leadership and governance teams are comprised mostly of individuals who identify as being part of the affected community they are reaching or based in or around the affected region. 2, affected community-led. An organization with at least 1 person in a senior management position who identifies as being from the affected community they are seeking to reach. This may also include individuals who are part of the diaspora. 3, affected community partnership. The organization has an active and local presence in the affected community, although no one from the leadership or governance team identifies as being from the affected community. Instead, there is an active and equitable partnership with local community organizations in the affected area. The following general areas of focus must be reflected in all project proposals in order to be considered for funding. Either strengthening children's education and/or development from birth to 12 years of age with a focus on those who have been left behind and whose developmental and educational needs are not being met, or strengthening the capacity and/or well-being of the support networks around children, including, though not limited to, their educators, caregivers, community care providers, etc., or supporting children and their support networks. While we encourage and consider proposals that only focus on one of the first 2 options, preference will be given to proposals that demonstrate a dual focus on children and key figures in their support networks. In addition, all project proposals must integrate play-based solutions in their programmatic concept, be culturally sensitive and community-driven, and be led by effective, results-driven leaders who are from or connected to the local community that they seek to serve. GCC requires all funded projects to report on the activities, outcomes, and impact resulting from their innovation, and requires an appropriate and rigorous approach to monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning, or MEAL, to measure results, evaluate outcomes, document key lessons, and maximize impact. All proposals should incorporate at least one of the following priority outcomes into their meal plans. Child development outcomes. This includes cognitive development, language and linguistic development, socio-emotional development, physical development, and motor skills development. In alignment with a whole child approach, these indicators should be assessed holistically, recognizing the interdependencies between these different domains of development. 2, child education outcomes. This includes assessment of foundational learning or education competencies with a prioritization of literacy and mathematics skills. Innovators must exercise careful consideration in selecting assessment tools and approaches that are contextually appropriate and reflect the curricula expectations of the local context. 3, education and caregiver well-being and capacity. This can include mental health and well-being outcomes of caregivers and educators or other key figures in children's support network, and metrics of knowledge, attitude, and practices related to positive parenting and nurturing care and the creation of supportive learning spaces. In addition to the required areas of focus, preference will be given to proposals that align with the following sub-themes. Please note that we would still encourage and consider proposals that do not explicitly focus on these sub-themes, as long as they align with the general areas of focus that I just described. The sub-themes include focus on strengthening informal education and development opportunities outside of the formal government-run education system to improve access for children who are being left behind, including, though not limited to, refugees, children from host communities, young girls or adolescent mothers, children with disabilities, and those who live in remote or coastal areas. And/or innovations that consider gender-related disadvantages for educators or caregivers, and also for young girls who will ultimately benefit from the proposed innovation. Or innovations that consider positive mental health and well-being using trauma-informed approaches, psychosocial support, and social and emotional learning with competency-based curriculum for educators and/or caregivers living in polycrisis settings, and also for children who will ultimately benefit from the proposed innovations. And/or innovations that leverage digital technologies and resources to increase access or use of the proposed innovation, or innovations that consider fathers' involvement in children's education and development. I will now hand it over to my colleague Mary to speak on the definition of play-based learning.
Sure, thank you so much. So play-based learning, it prepares children for an unpredictable future. So in a world that's constantly evolving, we all know, children need much more than just memorized facts. They need the ability to think critically, to adapt, and to innovate. And play-based learning helps children to explore, to experiment, to problem solve, and building confidence in their ability to tackle new challenges. And so instead of simply absorbing information through play-based learning, children learn how to learn, a skill that will serve them throughout their lives. And play-based learning unlocks essential skills for children. Through play, children develop 5 core skill areas. Physical skills, such as coordination, strength, fine motor abilities, creative skills, imagination, innovation, self-expression, social skills, communication, teamwork, cooperation, emotional skills such as resilience, empathy, and self-regulation, as well as cognitive skills, critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making. And these skills go far beyond the classroom or learning environment, shaping children into confident, capable individuals ready for whatever their futures may hold. And also, play-based learning nurtures well-being. So play is not just for fun, it's essential for children's mental health, their resilience, and their motivation. And when children learn through play, they experience less stress, stronger social emotional growth, and greater confidence in their abilities. And we believe at the LEGO Foundation that learning through play is not a luxury, it's a necessity in preparing children for a lifetime of curiosity, creativity, thriving, and success. And we say that playful experiences happen when an activity is experienced as joyful, if it generates feelings of enjoyment, motivation, and thrill, if it's meaningful, it helps children find meaning in what they are doing or learning. If it's actively engaging, if it involves active, engaged, minds-on thinking, as well as iterative thinking, such as experimentation or hypothesis or testing, as well social interaction, paving the way for children to build important relationships. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was really helpful. I will continue the presentation now, talking about measures of success. So starting with successful proof of concept innovations, a successful POC innovation demonstrates evidence with appropriate methodology, ideally from a controlled or limited setting, that the innovation improves one or more of the priority outcomes amongst the most underserved and unserved children from birth to 12 years old and the support networks around them. The methodology should be designed so that the outcomes can be attributed to the innovation. The innovation has feasible plans for how it can be sustained in the target region or scaled across a larger region, and/or evidence of demand for key stakeholders for ongoing implementation and scale. Similarly, at transition to scale, we are also looking for evidence with appropriate methodology that the innovation improves one or more of the priority outcomes amongst the most unserved and underserved children from birth to 12 years old and the support networks among them. But in transition to scale projects, we are also looking for evidence that the innovation can be feasibly implemented, sustained, and financially supported at scale in the target settings or regions, and/or demonstrated interest, financing, or commitments from key stakeholders, influencers, and partners for scaling up and sustaining the innovation. So in terms of application timelines, proof of concept funding could take up to 9 months to move through the application process from submission of the application to the start of the project. Applications will be reviewed approximately 1 to 2 months after the application intake deadline, and unsuccessful applicants will be notified within this time frame. Applications will involve a 2-stage review process. Stage 1 is screening, and Stage 2 is external peer review. Only those applications that pass the screening stage will be invited to undergo external peer review. Proposals that pass through the 2-stage review process will be presented to the relevant body of Grand Challenges Canada for a final funding decision. For transition to scale, funding applications will take approximately 9 to 12 months to move through the application process from Stage 2 application submission to project start. Only those applications that pass Stage 1 will be invited to submit a full application at Stage 2. Stage 1 applications will be reviewed approximately 1 to 2 months after the application intake deadline, and unsuccessful applicants will be notified within this time frame. Successful applicants that are invited to submit a full application will be given approximately 4 to 6 weeks to complete their Stage 2 application before undergoing external peer review. Those who successfully pass the peer review process will undergo extensive due diligence on potential for impact, operations, finances, technical parameters, intellectual property, partnerships, gender equality, environmental sustainability, and human rights and inclusion. Final funding decisions are made by Grand Challenges Canada's Management, Investment Committee, or Board of Directors, depending on the level of TTS funding. To apply for funding, applicants must use the online application provided, which you can access via Grand Challenges Canada's Flex portal. All applications must be submitted through the Flex portal. To access the application, visit gcc.flex.io to access an existing account or create a new account on the portal. Once your information has been processed, you can sign in, which you see in the bottom leftmost image. To start a new application, under Welcome, Bienvenue, the Play, Learn, Thrive application will be the first option. Click Start Proof of Concept or Start Transition to Scale application to begin filling in your application. You can save your work and return to it in the Drafts tab by clicking Edit. Once you are done, save the form and click the Submit button, which you will find at the bottom right of your screen. Once you submit, you will no longer be able to edit your application, so please ensure that you have completed your revisions prior to submitting the application. We have some tips that we provide applicants as you're looking to complete the application and submit to respond to this request for proposals. First, we encourage you to ensure that all criteria detailed in the request for proposals are considered. We suggest that you respond in narrative format rather than in bullet points. Please be mindful of word limits, as concise answers are best. Please read the questions carefully and address all parts of each question. Applications will only be considered when they're submitted in English. Unfortunately, we're unable to accept applications in any other language. However, we do aim to accommodate applicants who are not fluent in English. Applications will not be penalized for grammar or unconventional phrasing. We have an array of resources available to support you during the application period. You can visit grandchallenges.ca/funding opportunities to access the request for proposal documents in English, French, and Arabic, including the full RFP, a 3-page summary of the RFP for easy synthesis, and a document with frequently asked questions. Additional innovator resources are also available on Grand Challenges website at grandchallenges.ca/innovator resources, including an innovator toolbox, which helps innovators to develop their project proposals, innovator guidance on innovation, gender equality, and sustainability, Grand Challenges Canada's policies, and a reference guide to use the Flex portal. You can also access GCC's Gender Equity portal at grandchallenges.ca/gender. If you need any technical support while completing the application, please email flexsupport@grandchallenges.ca. If you have any specific questions relating to your project or any questions that have not been addressed in this presentation or in the resources on our website, please reach out to playlearnthrive@grandchallenges.ca. So as a reminder, the application deadline is April 24th, 2025 at 2:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. With that is the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for your time, for being here today, and for listening to all of this information. And we'd like to open the floor now for questions.
Thanks, Summer, for the presentation. We're getting lots of questions in the Q&A function, so thank you. I'm frantically typing and trying to respond to as many as possible. As Sam said, if we don't get to your question, please do follow up on the email that she provided, and we'll respond. Also, we'll try to address some common questions now that are coming in, just to keep it relevant for the wide audience that we have. One of the common questions that I'm seeing come through is related to implementation countries. So people asking whether they can implement outside of the 4 focus countries that are specified in the RFP. And the answer at this time, unfortunately, is no. The funding available through this RFP is focused on the 4 priority countries of Kenya, Uganda, Jordan, and Lebanon. So any work implementing outside of those 4 countries, we cannot fund at this time, although in the future we may expand the geographic focus. Another common question that's been coming through relates to the age range of children that your solutions may focus on. So as you'll have read in the RFP, the focus is from ages 0 to 12. But many of you asking if you can focus on a subset of that age range, and yes, we can consider innovations that do focus on subgroups within that 0 to 12 age range. Also hearing some questions related to transition to scale and the match funding requirement. Some of you asking about it could be a challenge for some organizations to secure match funding, which we completely understand. And as it says in the RFP, we will consider waivers on the match funding requirement on a case-by-case basis. So we would still encourage you to submit your proposals to us, and we will assess the requirement for match funding, as I said, on a case-by-case basis. So that could be looked at during our review of proposals. But really the principle behind the match funding is to really demonstrate demand and potential for sustainability of your solutions, and the fact that you have strong strategic partners who are committed to the solution. So it's a strong indicator for us that an innovation has potential for sustainability if there is match funding available. Just having a look through some of the other open questions that have come in. As I said, there's lots of people on the line, so we won't be able to address all of them. Let's just see if there's some relevant ones. So again, related to implementation countries, is there a preference for one country or multi-country proposals? We don't have a preference particularly related to that, as long as there is that focus on at least one of the 4 implementation countries that are specified. Another question, is there an advantage to submitting a transition to scale proposal in the first window? Might the funds all be assigned in the first round? We don't anticipate assigning all of the funds in the first round. So it's kind of remains to be seen depending on the quality of the submissions that we receive. But we do anticipate doing several rounds of application intake for transition to scale. Just looking through, and if other colleagues have responded to any questions that they feel would be good to share with the wider group, then please jump in as well as I look through.
There is a question, Patrick, relating to a combination or partnership of organizations and how that would fit into the 3 categories relating to community-led projects. Specifically in response to that question, the classification of community-led with the 3 criteria presented relate to the entity that is applying for the project, so the main grantee. So that is the organization that will be assessed for their affiliations to the community. We can go back and forth if you'd like, Patrick.
Yeah, sure. Can you clarify that question? Or did you answer it?
Yeah, I answered it.
Okay, thank you. Another one related to the types of organizations that can apply. Can a foundation not registered as a non-profit apply? As you'll see from the RFP and the FAQs, that those resources that Sama mentioned, we can only fund not-for-profit organizations through this funding pool. So that's an important point to note.
Maybe there's an interesting question here. Are communities not considered refugees or IDPs eligible?
Yeah, I can answer that question. We're aiming to reach unserved and underserved communities. So this includes a long list of communities, much more than just IDPs and refugees. Maybe I should share my screen again to go back to the presentation just so that we can reference the list of, I think we had it in the presentation, but there is a list of, it could be communities in rural settings, communities where children are heads of households. There's a whole list in the request for proposals of here. Oh no. Oh yeah, but this is kind of an example of different kinds of communities that would fall into the populations that we're hoping to reach. So it could be communities without access to water and sanitation, communities with exposure to violence, poverty, disease, natural disasters, forced displacement. So it is really quite an expansive group that we're looking to reach, primarily those that are just hardest to reach and most or underserved. I see another common question is whether projects can transition from proof of concept to transition to scale directly. Unfortunately, that is not an option. Proof of concept and transition to scale are two distinct application processes. And so if a project is successful in being selected for proof of concept and is successful in achieving their proof of concept, when there is a future RFP and an additional funding round, that project can put their name forward to be considered at the transition to scale phase. However, there's no automatic intake from proof of concept to transition to scale.
And there was another question related to proof of concept on whether or not in order or how we would determine for those that are at the TTS phase that they've achieved proof of concept. And so as Sama mentioned, we request internal process, we have external peer reviewers to look at TTS proposals to see if they have achieved a proof of concept before we take them forward. So there's a review panel as part of that process that sits outside of GCC of experts who have a good understanding of the local context as well of each of the applications.
Thanks, Michelle. And just to touch, a lot of you asking, will we share the slides and the recording afterwards? And yes, we will be sharing those for you to review after this session. Interesting question from Joe in the Q&A. Can you advise on the percentage of winning proposals? So yeah, I think it's an important thing to take into consideration. You'll see there's kind of close to 500 of you on this call alone, and we've got a lot of interest in this funding call. So it's a very competitive process. I wouldn't like to put an actual percentage on it, but I think just seeing the numbers here, we have funding available for 9 proof of concept innovations and 7 transition to scale innovations through this funding call. So not great at maths, but if you see the correlation between the number of funds available, the grants available, and the number of people on this call and people interested, then I think you can assume it's a very competitive process. So keep that in mind as well when you're submitting your proposals. And again, lots of questions specific to your particular innovation or proposal that you're developing, and we would take those outside of this call and follow up with the email address that's been provided.
There have been a few questions on whether there's a preference for single organization applications versus multi consortiums or multi-country. We encourage collaboration. We don't have, there's not a preference between whether it's a single organization applying or a partnership of organizations. And in the same way, there's not a preference between whether you're working on one focus country or multiple focus countries. Sometimes what we see is in a proof of concept or earlier stage, that's happening in one context. And then as transitioning to scale happens, that might end up in more contexts. So we don't have a preference. You won't be penalized if you're just working in one country versus multiple of the 4, and the same with if you're one single organization applying versus a consortium.
There's a question here about accessing a list of projects funded previously. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, Play, Learn, Thrive is a new portfolio at Grand Challenges Canada, and this is our first round of funding. So we have not previously funded any projects. So unfortunately, there is no such list available. There's another question here about being a newer organization and if you're at a disadvantage. We are not assessing how new or well established an organization is, especially at proof of concept. There is very little done in the review stage to look at the organization's history, but we are really focusing on the innovation that you are proposing and its relevance to the request for proposals. So there should not be a disadvantage at proof of concept for being a new innovation with no audited accounts. We have received some questions from the live stream as well. So I'll just address some of those. One of the questions is, given the recent developments of countries' administrations slashing humanitarian funding, what is the ceiling for support costs for this proposal call? In general, the ceilings for the overall funding amounts are 250,000 Canadian dollars at proof of concept and between 300,000 up to 1.5 million at transition to scale. But in terms of support costs, you're referring to the overheads or general support for an organization. Grand Challenges Canada typically provides up to 10% of the total funding amount in indirect costs. And so those can be associated to more general costs such as rent or overheads for an organization.
For those who are on the webinar, I'm noticing some similar questions coming through that we've answered. In the comment box or question box, you can see under the answered column where some of these questions might have already been addressed.
So a couple of questions about submitting multiple proposals. So an organization can submit multiple proposals, whether it be a proof of concept, transition to scale, or multiple of either. But we do stipulate that the project lead must be unique for each proposal. So we can't consider if you're the lead for one innovation proposal, you can't be the lead on the second one. So it would need to be somebody else taking the lead on that from your organization. But it is possible for organizations to submit multiple proposals.
So there's a question about defining what new and untested ideas means at proof of concept. So just to give a little bit more guidance, we are looking for solutions that when they're tested, they're effective or more effective than traditional approaches, and that the innovation has potential to progress to scale. If you look in the request for proposals and at the resources presented on the resources slide, so on the Grand Challenges Canada website, there is more detail on how we define innovation, and I think that might give you a better sense of what we're looking for in terms of new ideas. But just in general, we define innovation as bold ideas with the potential to fundamentally transform how life-saving and life-improving solutions reach and help the most vulnerable people affected by crisis. So it's approaching a problem in a new and different way to existing efforts, or trying ideas that already exist in a new context. So something that works in a stable context but has never been tried in a crisis or emergency setting could be another example of a new idea or an innovation.
Lots or a few questions, just again to emphasize about eligibility for applying organizations, and people asking if organizations who are not from the 4 implementation countries, would they be eligible? So again, looking at the eligibility criteria in the RFP, organizations need to be legally registered to do business in at least one of the 4 priority countries, and must have an active presence in one of those countries. So that's a key criteria for us. So it could be possible for organizations that are based outside of those countries to apply, but they must be registered to operate in the 4 priority countries, and have a strong presence in those countries. I would say one of the sort of key things is that they would have implementing partners who are based in the communities that they're seeking to serve, would be something we would look for.
I see a question. I think you might have answered this already, Patrick, about an advantage to submitting a TTS proposal in the first window. And Patrick had mentioned that there is significant interest, so depending on the applications received, there may be an advantage to submitting earlier. In terms of future planning to expand to other countries, we do hope to expand to as many countries as possible in the future, but unfortunately, the priority countries have not been further defined beyond these 4 countries listed.
There's an interesting question here about the proof of concept. Would you expect concepts to implement rigorous research methods like a randomized control trial, or other research methods acceptable? Design research, feasibility research, implementation research.
Yes, so a randomized control trial is acceptable, definitely, but we do accept other methods of research as well for proof of concept. And that is, I believe, detailed more closely in the request for proposals. So we'd encourage that you look there to see examples of what we're looking for in terms of demonstrating the evidence. But generally, yes, it is important that we can attribute the evidence presented to some sort of research or some sort of rigorous methodology.
See a follow-up question related to eligibility of applicants. Would INGOs be eligible as long as they have implementing partners in the community? So yeah, theoretically, yes. I would note, however, that in my experience, we have found that larger kind of international NGOs can sometimes there's sometimes issues with complying with requirements of our funding, and taking on the terms of our funding agreements. So I think a local organization as the lead applicant can be advantageous in that regard as well. But we could consider INGOs as long as there is that strong link to the implementation country and a strong presence there and strong local partners.
There's a question here. Would a TTS proposal rejected in the first round be considered for a follow-on round if it is redesigned? Depending on which stage of actually, I think at all stages you would receive some sort of feedback if you are eligible but have been declined after the eligibility screen, and you are encouraged to reapply if you're able to redesign the project based on the feedback received.
Important clarification here as well in the Q&A. So for proof of concept, are we meant to answer all application questions now, or do we start with the first 7? So for proof of concept, we are asking you to complete the full application form. The distinction, so the first screening stage does focus on the first 7 questions, and then those that pass that stage would move to have all of their proposal assessed and reviewed by a group of external experts. So we are asking you to submit the full application for proof of concept at this stage. It's just our review is split from the initial screen, as I said, looks at the summary section, and then the full review, if your proposal passes that screen, is then reviewed in much more detail.
There's a question here, can organizations be part of more than one consortium or application? Yes, organizations are eligible to submit multiple applications. However, each application needs to have a unique project lead. So there needs to be one individual who's the key applicant from an organization, and that needs to be a unique individual. I see a question, is there a limit for consortium members? There are no limits for consortium members.
Question related to would we consider an intervention that focuses on reaching children with disabilities within the crisis context? And yes, I think that would be something we would consider, obviously, as long as the proposal meets the other requirements in the RFP, including the geographic focus and the priority focus areas.
There's a question regarding a cap on staff salaries or consultancy fees under the proof of concept grant. There is no hard and fast cap on either of these as long as there's a strong rationale for the purpose of the allocation of funds. And the applicant can charge a portion of time, for example, 50% for direct staff. So we do ask for the level of effort for staff members and ask that you quantify the amount of their time that is used towards this specific project.
Another question related to eligibility of the applying organisations. I'd mentioned about having a presence in country, and if an organisation is not registered in the country but they're working through partners in that country, does that count? So, as mentioned, so in the eligibility requirements, we do state that applying organizations need to be registered to do business in at least one of the four countries. So if you don't have that, but you do have a partner through which you're working in the country, then a recommendation would be that that partner applies as the lead organization, with your organization acting as the sub for that particular innovation.
Maybe a question around the proof of concept. If a different country has done research on a concept, can a country use the research of that country to submit as proof of concept if they're doing the same program but haven't conducted that research locally?
Yeah, great question. And maybe Michelle, you can jump in. I'll just say that sometimes something that's been proved effective in one country may not be transferable to another. So it might require another proof of concept study to demonstrate that it is applicable to that particular context, or the new context that it's focusing on. But Michelle, maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Patrick. We do see that sometimes where there needs to be a study on feasibility or on the objectives themselves to make sure that they can work in a new context or a different context. So we're open to seeing that as well, as long as it's innovative and new for that context, and the research itself hasn't been done in that specific context, and that there's a need to contextualize it. I also did see some questions on if we would fund projects that are already happening in their scale up. And we do see that at the early transition to stage level. So we see projects coming through that need support to transition to scale, and so need support to grow, but they already have proof of concept and have already started implementing on a small scale in a few communities, but require funding and technical support to scale out to more communities, and to focus on figuring out sustainability. So we would fund that as well.
So a question about, I guess, how consortiums would work. So the question from Julius: can more than one NGO work together as a consortium from the same country? Yes, absolutely. But with various areas of work specification, yes, again. And then related to the budget, would it be shared, or would each have a separate budget of 250,000 Canadian dollars for proof of concept? So the full budget for each grant is 250,000 Canadian dollars for proof of concept. So that would be shared across the consortium of partners and across the activities that you're proposing to do. Again, just to emphasize, lots of very specific questions to particular proposals, which again, we'd encourage you to email us with those types of questions. We're just wanting to keep it general and applicable to everyone on the call, but we're more than happy to address questions. And this isn't your final opportunity to send us questions, and we can support you throughout the application stage.
There's a question about integrated innovation, which mentions the three components of integrated innovation: science, social, and business. And the question asks, how important is the business component? So in general, we look favorably upon innovations that are considering at least two out of the three of the components of integrated innovation. It's great if you're able to consider all three, but it really comes down to different factors on what the components and the relevance to a particular innovation is. So in certain cases, the business component might be less relevant to the specific innovation. We have 3 more minutes in the webinar, so maybe we can choose a couple more questions to respond to verbally. And hopefully you can rewatch the recording, look through the presentation after, and then if you still have follow-up questions, you can always email us at playlearnthrive@grandchallenges.ca.
There's a question on whether or not we'd be interested in interventions that focus on children who live with disabilities within a crisis context. And yes, absolutely, we'd like to receive applications that that have wide focus on children and children with disabilities as well.
And there's also a question on whether public with universities or like public universities or public hospitals could apply.
I believe, well, we're only accepting applications from nonprofit organizations. If it is a nonprofit hospital, can one of the rest of you guide me on whether that would be eligible?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a focus or priority for locally led not-for-profit organizations that are more grassroots and that really have a local angle. We're definitely interested in receiving applications from all not-for-profits, but I will say that we do really want to receive applications from not-for-profits that are very local and really close to the issues.
So with 1 minute remaining, I don't know, Sam, if you want to close things off, but just to say again, we will be sharing the recording of this session, the slides from the session. And again, if we haven't addressed your question here, please follow up on the email address that was provided. Yeah, I would also like to wish everyone good luck in your application. We're really excited to read through and review all of the exciting ideas that will be coming through, no doubt. But Sam, I'll let you close off as well.
Thank you everyone for attending today's session. We had some really, really interesting questions. We were able to answer 88 in writing, and there's a lot more still open, but I think we did get to address those, many of those verbally and many of those in the presentation. So I would highly encourage you to re-review the slides, review the RFP document and the FAQ, because a lot of these questions are answered there in a lot of detail and in writing for your reference, and that'll be a really helpful resource while you're completing the application. However, if you do have any questions, you can feel free to email us at playlearnthrive@grandchallenges.ca. That is the email account where you received the registration details for this webinar, so you should all have access to it. Thank you all so much for joining, and best of luck with the applications. We are really, really excited to receive and learn more about all of the amazing work that you all do. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.